Think knights in shining armor waddled around like penguins, barely able to move. Watch as we take a real suit of medieval plate armor and put it to the test, running, jumping, and yes, even doing cartwheels. If Hollywood had it right, you'd hear us clanging to the floor. Instead, you'll see something that'll make you question every movie you've ever watched. Turns out, the truth about knights is way more impressive, and a lot more surprising than the myth. Ready to see what armor can actually do? Ever notice how every movie knight moves like they're wearing an entire car and has to practically be forklifted onto their horse? It's like someone stuffed a medieval hero inside a suit of kitchen pans and said, "Okay, action." The classic scene plays out the same way every time. Some poor actor has to wobble across a muddy field, joints creaking, arms flailing out to keep their balance. All while some unlucky squire runs around trying to push him upright or drag him onto a nervous horse that can barely handle the extra weight. By the time the knight actually stands up straight, he looks like he's regretting every life choice that led to this point. You have to wonder, if everyone in armor really needed 3 helpers just to move, how did anybody even make it into battle? Let alone stand a chance against arrows, swords, or honestly, a strong breeze? You don't have to just rely on memory, either. Think about those iconic movies everyone seems to know. There's the classic Monty Python gag, with a knight battling it out after losing all his limbs. Sure, it's funny, but somehow, it still gets filed in your brain as how medieval armor worked. Go back further, and you'll find those old Robin Hood flicks, where the knights have helmets so big and clumsy they look more like upside-down buckets than real headgear. If you ever watched those, you probably remember the scenes where someone tries to run, only to basically tip over. Even supposedly epic movies keep the same slapstick routine. A knight trying to mount a horse looks more like he's climbing a greasy slide than anything heroic. The message is clear. You see a suit of armor, and your mind tells you, here comes the world's slowest wrestler. It's honestly a bit mind-boggling when you stop and think about it. These movies suggest the average knight had less flexibility than a cardboard cutout, and yet, historical records say medieval Europe was filled with real wars, brutal tournaments, and knights competing to be the best warriors around. Imagine lining up for battle behind a row of guys who look like they're seconds away from losing a wrestling match to gravity. The odds don't add up. Real soldiers can't win wars if just walking is a danger. But those movie scenes stick in your head anyway. You see it enough times in enough movies, and it quietly rewires what you think is normal about knights in armor. Hollywood didn't invent this idea just to make you laugh, though slapstick does make for an easy crowd pleaser. Those images come from a long tradition of theater, where anything elaborate and clunky reads as ancient or impressive to audiences who've never seen real armor up close. Backstage, the costumes are heavy because they're made from cheap material, with metal painted over fabric, or even plastic sprayed silver to look like steel. Nobody stopped to ask if actual knights wore armor that left them gasping for air, but that became the default. Eventually, the awkward knight became a shortcut for medieval setting. Next thing you know, every reference, cartoons, comics, TV specials, starts copying the same mistake. It's like an echo chamber powered by rusty hinges. To see how deep this idea runs, just try remembering the last time you watched a modern movie and thought, wow, that knight moves fast. Doesn't happen. Even when Hollywood has the budget for real armor, it's often made oversized or bolted together for quick costume changes. There's always a scene where somebody clangs around a corner or thuds onto the ground like a drop toolbox, and it gets a big laugh. Armor is painted as a tragic burden, a metal prison for anyone brave enough to wear it. Basically, the message is, sure, you might survive a sword blow, but walking to the store would be impossible. These scenes do more than make you chuckle. Over years and decades, they've planted a stubborn mental image. When someone says medieval knight, you see wobbling, creaking, maybe some poor guy stuck on his back, like an overturned beetle. Pop culture becomes the new truth, just because it keeps repeating itself louder and louder than actual history ever could. Even little details, like how knights supposedly needed a crane to get onto horseback, spoiler, they definitely didn't, are now just common knowledge. Never mind that actual records from the time describe knights as athletic, competitive, and often surprisingly youthful. Pop culture insists their armor was basically a prison. And just to sprinkle some expert insight onto this pile of myths, here's what Dr. Tobias Capwell, not exactly a rookie when it comes to medieval armor, has to say. Properly made plate armor is not restrictive or unwieldy. Most of the stereotypes about its weight and bulk come from seeing ill-fitting, fake, or misused examples in film and museums. That's not exactly subtle. Historians have been waving that red flag for years, but movies just keep banging the same drum. If you wonder how wrong pop culture can get something, knights are a perfect case study. To really hammer the point home, let's pull up a side-by-side. On one side, you've got your typical Hollywood disaster, a knight flopping over, barely able to take 3 steps without nearly eating dirt. On the other, you'll see a modern reenactor suited up in real, historically accurate plate armor. The result is almost embarrassing for the movie industry. The reenactor walks around, squats, even starts jogging, while the costume knight looks like he's surviving an earthquake. One is ready for the rigors of battle, the other can barely face a staircase. The contrast isn't just a small detail, it's a reminder that we've let decades of cheap costumes rewrite the past for us. Think about what battles would actually look like if the Hollywood version was true. Imagine thousands of knights moving at half speed, tripping over their own feet, and hoping the enemy is equally uncoordinated. That's not an epic showdown. That's the world's saddest medieval parade, with more slapstick falls than swordplay. The real wars of the time, packed with charges, retreats, and brutal hand-to-hand fighting, would have ended in total disaster if these movie myths held up even a little. So, go ahead, laugh at the movie knights stuck in mud or struggling to bend their knees. But remember, movies aren't just playing for laughs. They've left behind a myth that almost everyone believes. The truth is so much more interesting, and it's closer to science and sports than it is to old comedy sketches. What if I told you medieval armor was actually the medieval version of high-tech sports gear? The kind of thing athletes would envy, not avoid. You're about to see why. If armor was as useless as movies make it look, you really have to ask, why did anyone in their right mind bother wearing it to war? Nobody wakes up, straps 50 pounds of metal to their chest, and says, all right, time to be as slow as a garden gnome. The reality is, plate armor was literally medieval Europe's answer to the modern bodysuit, carefully engineered, custom-made, and designed with so much thought, you could call it the medieval equivalent of high-tech sports gear. Forget the idea of chunks of iron bolted together. Real plate armor was practically the result of constant experimentation, problem-solving, and years of handiwork from experts who didn't settle for almost working. The most common picture is a random pile of heavy metal. People imagine knights like they got caught in a rainstorm at a hardware store. But in reality, armor was engineered to move with the human body, not against it. Every suit had to match the wearer's build. This wasn't a factory job. No two knights had exactly the same set. Armorers measured each limb, each curve of the body, and hammered pieces so that elbows, knees, and shoulders all lined up. The result? Joints that bent where your joints bend. Imagine walking around in a winter jacket that somehow turns into shorts when you squat down. That was the magic of plate. Let's talk about the details that put ancient armorers ahead of modern myth. When you see a reenactor in actual plate, here's what happens. He bends his knees all the way down, plants both feet, and ties his own shoelaces. Try that in a movie prop suit, and you'd probably hear the sound of rivets popping followed by a scene change. The real test. Throw in a squat, a low crawl, or even a hop up the nearest set of steps. Instead of being stuck like a turtle, the person inside just keeps moving, sometimes with more grace than the camera guy trying to keep up. It's all thanks to those articulated joints. Every limb wasn't just a single solid tube. The arms, for example, were crafted from individual pieces called lames, which are basically strips of metal attached using rivets that act like hinges, along with leather straps that keep them in the right place. Bend your elbow, and the lames slide over each other like a set of nesting cups. Your movement isn't just possible, it's almost natural. The knees had their own system, with plates that cover but never pinch or poke. Even fingers weren't forgotten, with overlapping pieces known as gauntlets giving the hands so much flexibility, you could throw a punch or grab a sword hilt without thinking twice. What about the chest and back? Instead of a big, flat sheet of steel, the breastplate was curved and shaped to fit the ribcage, and the backplate did the same for the spine. These curves matter. It's designed for both comfort and survival. When a heavy blow lands, those curves send most of the force to the edges of the plate or deflect it off entirely, so you're not taking the full hit straight to the ribs. The helmet, too, was shaped to turn away sword points and arrows, with breathing holes on the sides and space to turn your head. Not too different from the best sports helmets today, minus the team logo. And here's where things get really interesting. The whole suit averaged 45 to 55 pounds. You probably know at least one person who takes a backpack to school that feels heavier than that. By comparison, a modern soldier in full kit carries about 60 or even 70 pounds on a hot day with less freedom to move. Armor weight wasn't just a number, though. It was balanced, spread out over the entire body. Each piece carried a share of the load, from head to toe. The weight rested on your hips, your shoulders, and even your back, almost like you're wearing 5 or 6 light coats rather than a single crushing shell. If you've ever picked up a suitcase and held it close to your body, you know this trick. Compare dragging that suitcase at arm's length. Everything aches. But wearing a suit designed for your frame and moving with you, it feels lighter, and you're a lot less likely to fall face first into the mud. And don't forget the real invisible hero here, the underarmor padding. Every knight slipped on a thick, quilted garment, called a gambeson, before layering up in steel. It wasn't just for comfort, it cushioned blows, stopped bruises, and kept the metal from rubbing holes in your skin. In the cold, it acted like insulation. In battle, it acted like shock absorbers for a car, spreading force, catching shrapnel, and making the weight even more manageable. In a way, the padded layer was the knight's secret advantage, transforming what could have been a torture device into something bearable for hours at a time. You have to give major credit to the armorers, the blacksmiths, technicians, and metalworkers who figured all this out centuries before 3D printing or custom foam inserts were even a dream. These weren't just strongmen with hammers. Armorers understood steel the way chefs understand seasoning. They needed it hardened in places, like over the heart or down the shins, but it still had to be flexible at every joint. To achieve just the right mix, they forged, hammered, and then tempered the metal, a process of heating and cooling that made it tough, but never brittle. If a plate was too hard, it cracked on a heavy hit. Too soft, and it bent or dented. Some areas, like the torso or the top of the head, were made especially thick, while others kept just enough protection to stop a cut or a glancing arrow. As plate armor evolved, so did the tricks built into the design. Early versions mixed chain mail with individual plates, letting the wearer move freely until better steels arrived and let smiths cover more of the body without adding bulk. Curved surfaces and smart use of hinges became the gold standard. Move your arm, and the armor moves with it, almost like a shadow. Want to look impressive at a tournament? Armor was polished, decorated, and even colored. Heraldic designs and engraved details told who you were, but all that flash rides on a foundation meant for real fighting. While we're talking physics, let's make this clear. None of this only worked on rare display. Plate armor was the result of a medieval tech race. As weapons changed, so did the armor. Early iron plates were thick and clumsy, but skill, better steels, and new forging techniques let armorers shave down the weight, add more coverage, and keep everything mobile. What you'd call fashion today was actually just the latest update in a constant search for stronger, lighter, faster. Knights, frankly, weren't dragging themselves through mud. They were keeping up with the best their world could offer. So when you watch someone in historically accurate armor squat, stretch, or vault into a saddle, remember, every bit of movement is a win for the science behind the steel. The myth of the stiff, helpless knight collapses with every step, every swing of the arm, every leap. Plate armor let its wearers run, jump, even do a roll if they felt like showing off, and there's nothing waddle-like about that. The only thing to trip over is the old idea that armor was a punishment, not a power-up. But okay, suiting up is only half the deal. All the engineering in the world doesn't make much sense if you can barely swing a sword. So what does real combat in plate armor actually look like? Let's see a knight in action. Would you actually believe it if I said a knight could do a somersault in full armor? Sounds ridiculous, but it's time to toss out what movies have taught you and see what a real set of plate armor can handle. Let's skip the dusty museum displays and get right into a real-life test. I'm not talking about an actor huffing under 50 pounds of bolts and duct tape. Here's a living, breathing person in an actual suit of medieval armor, built with the same care and custom work as the originals, ready to show what can really be done. The first thing anyone asks, can you even walk in that stuff, let alone fight? We brought in a reenactor dressed from head to toe in well-fitted plate. No extra padding for show, no hidden breaks or secret zippers, just steel, leather, and a thick, padded gambeson underneath. The plan is simple. Put all those clunky Hollywood knight routines to the test, step by step. So, you ask them to start with the basics. Can you jog? Without any ceremony, they set off at a light run, feet pounding over grass and gravel. No dancers, twirls, but definitely no waddling or shaky knees either. Next up, a staircase. Straightforward, but you'd never know it seeing most movie nights battle just to stand up. Our test subject just moves up, foot over foot, with a rhythm that wouldn't slow down in a crowd. Alright, that's walking and climbing. Time to add in something movie nights never manage, swinging an actual sword. Armed with a blunt practice blade, the reenactor starts with wide swings, over the shoulder, sideways, around the back. The armor doesn't rattle. The joints respond just like modern protective gear, so every blow lands with force. There's no sense that every motion is a struggle. In fact, there's almost an ease to it, like wearing a heavy jacket or maybe a weighted vest, but still able to twist, duck, or step away. No wheezing, no leaning against the wall to catch a breath, just smooth movement and focus. Let's make things interesting and try a tumble or two. The request sounds crazy if you bought the idea that plate turns its wearer into a toppled fridge. But no, flat on the grass, the reenactor crouches, does a forward roll, and hops up on the other end. If you've ever tried to get up with a loaded backpack, you already know the trick. Keep the weight tight to your body, and your legs do most of the work. The enameled armor barely scuffs, and our test subject is upright in about 2 seconds, ready to move again. Still not enough. Go for the bold stunt, an actual somersault. Arms up, a quick roll, a little bounce, and just like that, back on their feet. No audience gasp, just a round of applause from anyone who thought that was impossible. Now, to really hammer this in, let's set up a split screen. Left side, you've got a textbook movie night. The prop armor wobbles, knees bent out, hips frozen. They try anything fancier than shuffling, and the whole suit creaks. Attempts to climb or swing look like someone fighting through a wet sleeping bag. Maybe they even need help just standing back up. On the right, there's our real armor in action. Nimble footwork, clean steps, spins, and sword swings, all happening faster than the movie side can even reach for their helmet. The contrast is real, almost jarring. You might be thinking this is just for the young or especially fit, but there's more to the story. Back in the 15th century, knights competed in tournaments specifically to show off. Athletic skill wasn't just for glory, it was expected. According to accounts from that time, acrobatic feats happened in front of huge crowds. One Italian knight, Galeazzo de Mantova, famously did a handstand on horseback, in full plate armor. Others vaulted onto their horses or ran obstacle courses, throwing punches and swinging weapons while crowds roared them on. These weren't exaggerated stories, either. They got written down because they surprised people, but not because they were impossible. The armor was made to move, and knights trained for this every single week. Even outside the tournaments, the records show this wasn't rare. Knights literally had to prove they could get up from a fall, climb back into a saddle, or sprint over muddy ground, often while being pelted by arrows, rocks, or insults. If armor had stopped them from doing any of this, someone would have mentioned it. But instead, there are more tales about creative trick moves or sudden dashes across the field. Justs, duels, melees. These were full-contact events with points scored for style, speed, and power. You can see this echoed today by historical martial artists and reenactors. If you watch a modern armor fighting demonstration, you'll see people sprinting, ducking, rolling, getting up from prone, and even climbing ladders in suits weighing almost exactly what their medieval counterparts did. Videos from Benjamin Rose's site and plenty of reenactment groups will give you a front-row seat. It's not just soldiers and pro athletes, either. Experiments by museums let volunteers gear up and try swinging swords, hoisting shields, and slinging themselves across grass fields. Even without special training, people manage to run, get up, and move limbs in every direction. Some even do jumping jacks for the camera. How is all this possible? The answer is hiding in the engineering, not the muscle. The armor is made up of different shaped plates, each attached with rivets and leather straps. Everything overlaps and slides, so elbow bends, knee locks, and even wrist turns work just like they do in regular clothes. The individual lames, the strips of metal you see on arm and leg pieces, move like the slats in window blinds, flexing just as far as you need without pinching or locking up. Dr. Tobias Capwell summed it up. A harness of plate armor was made up of individual elements for each limb, each element linked by movable rivets and leather straps, and thus allowing practically all of the body's movements without any impairment due to rigidity of material. You're not fighting the suit, it's moving with you. It didn't stop with basic movement, either. Tournaments and battles both called for fast reactions. Knights would run from cover, leap over low walls, even vault onto their horses in front of cheering crowds. Some could cartwheel, if the situation called for showing off, and more than a few did. Reports from the 15th and 16th centuries talk about men-at-arms mounting horses without touching a stirrup, standing up from a flat fall, and rolling out of danger, all in full harness, under threat of actual weapons. So here's the mini payoff. When your plate armor is built right and fits your body, the only thing that feels unusual is the extra weight. It's heavy clothing, not a prison. You can move, fight, and even show off a cartwheel in front of your friends if you want bragging rights. Movie nights flop and flail, but the myth of the clumsy tin can just crashed and burned in real time for everyone watching. Now that you've seen the proof with your own eyes, the question is, how did this movie myth hang around for so long? If everything points to knights being quick on their feet, why is it so hard to shake off this picture of the bumbling tin can warrior? The truth is, this myth didn't just appear out of nowhere. It's been built up piece by piece, and most of it came from the way we've seen armor outside its real setting. Let's talk about where things went so wrong, and why the clunky knight has survived in our imagination far longer than it ever did on any battlefield. First up, old museum displays. If you've walked past a glass case filled with what looks like a giant metal suit, maybe the arms are 3 inches too long, or the shoulder pads stick out like you're looking at the world's first linebacker. It's not just your eyes playing tricks. Museums are stuffed with pieces of armor that were never made for fighting in the first place. There's ceremonial armor, which was built for display, coronations, or royal parades, not for running onto a field swinging a sword. A lot of these pieces are oversized, so an important person could fit it over fancy clothes or ride through town looking extra impressive. Even odder, sometimes the museum just put the stuff on whatever mannequin they had handy, without worrying if it fit. Throw parade armor on a mannequin built like a coat rack, and you get this huge, droopy metal shell that looks like it would crush anyone inside. The result is a display that's more rusty robot than elite medieval athlete, making armor look bigger, heavier, and less practical than it really was. On top of that, these displays leave out the fact that real armor came in all sizes and was shaped around the person who wore it. Movie and TV armor, parade suits, and mismatched museum pieces all get mixed together, so the public only sees the clumsiest examples. Add in the fact that the armor sits there frozen in one pose, with zero movement, and visitors walk away thinking no human could even move in something that stiff. No wonder people assume just standing up in full armor is a workout, never mind fighting a battle. If you look at what happened on stage, the picture only gets messy, eh? Back in the days before Hollywood, plays and pageants needed to look old and authentic on a budget, so the props department whipped up armor out of whatever they could find. Cheap metal, stiff leather, painted cardboard. Nobody was worried about sword fighting in it. Actors just had to stagger around, wave a sword, and hope nothing fell apart before the curtain closed. This slow, awkward movement wasn't because the actors were reading from a script. It's because if they tried to go any faster, the gear would pinch, collapse, or slip off in front of the audience. These early performances set the tone for everything that came after. Once movies got involved, the whole thing got even sillier. Cameras love a good gag, and there's nothing funnier than a guy in a night suit toppling over or struggling to get up again. Early Hollywood was all about fast filming, so costumes had to come on and off quickly. That meant most of the armor was built without joints, was the wrong size, or sagged in all the wrong spots. Actors shuffled rather than walked, swaying like they'd left their knees back in their trailer. Go back and watch some black and white Robin Hood scenes, and you'll see what happens when filmmakers want drama but only have props that barely fit their star. Heavy iron helmets get swapped for giant painted buckets, breastplates that would slide halfway down the belly, and fake chains hanging loose at the elbows. None of it made for movement or comfort. The joke was built into the costume. If an actor tried to swing a sword, half the time they hit themselves, which only made things funnier on screen, but worse for the image of the real medieval knight. As if that wasn't enough, museums sometimes manage to make armor look even stranger. The arms dangle, the legs stick out at impossible angles, and the head is so big you'd think it belonged to a cartoon mascot. And let's not forget that a lot of the armor on display isn't even the stuff used in wars. Some is tournament armor, designed for jousting on horseback, which sometimes weighed a lot more because the knight barely needed to walk. Stick that on a mannequin where a 12-year-old visitor can compare themselves, and all they remember is, there's no way anyone could move in that. Fast forward a bit, and suddenly video games and cartoons inherit the same goof. All those early images of rotten museum armor, combined with the comedy of creaky actors, get recycled by animators and game designers. In most games, the knight is tough, but slow, a tank that moves at a crawl, but takes all the hits. Cartoons exaggerate it for laughs, adding sound effects for every step, making the armor squeak, rattle, or clang with every move. Some games even create fictional armor fatigue, so your character can't sprint or dodge, just to keep in line with what people already believe. Before long, the myth of the heavy, awkward knight is locked in for another generation. The fact is, most people never see real armor in action at all. Their only close-up view is in a museum, where the suit stands motionless, or during a school history lesson when someone holds up a single gauntlet and talks about the heavy burden. There's rarely a demo showing how someone can run, lunge, or even roll in the full suit. Live demonstrations, where you see a historical reenactor mount a horse, sprint, or swing a sword, are still pretty rare. So, if your idea of armor comes from standing next to a mannequin, you'll definitely believe that knights were one shove away from a face plant. Another problem is that popular stories about knights only ever show the high-status side. The knight in shining armor gets all the attention, but the truth is more complicated. For one thing, not all armor was expensive, gold-plated, or covered in fancy crests. Affordable versions, maybe less decorative but still effective, showed up in markets and city fairs. Mercenaries, urban guards, and even some well-off farmers could buy a set of plate that worked just fine for the job. This means that real armor wasn't just a prop for kings and nobles. Those stories about only the rich buying armor simply aren't true. But because the myth fits our need for grand fairy tales, it gets repeated more than the facts ever do. And the old stereotype about rusty armor that made everything heavier? That's another trick played by time and TV. High-quality armor was made from steel that resisted rust and every knight, squire, or hired hand spent hours cleaning, oiling, and polishing it. Rust meant you weren't doing your job. That squeaky armor sound, that was never part of the plan. Well-kept armor gleamed in the sun and moved as quietly as well-oiled machinery, because the person inside was depending on it to keep them alive, not to win best costume at a party. After all this, it's easy to see how the myth stuck. The slow, clumsy knight is more entertaining, more dramatic, and just plain funnier than the reality. But the mini payoff here is simple. Most of what people know about knights comes from props, parade suits, and jokes, not the real deal. The slapstick may stick in your head, but the historical facts point in the other direction. So, next time someone cracks a joke about a medieval knight wobbling around like a toddler, just remember you've seen what those suits can actually do. Watching a movie might be easy, but now you know better. Bad costumes and lazy props aren't history. And as wild as this myth is, you haven't even heard the best part yet. The technology and clever ideas behind armor changed the course of warfare for everyone, not just those who could afford a suit of shining steel. Let's talk about what really happened when plate armor hit the medieval battlefield. Picture a knight, not stuck in slow motion, but charging right at you, glinting in the sunlight, absolutely sure he can shrug off most ordinary attacks. Armor didn't just make you look tough, it let you survive things that would wipe out anyone else. Straight up, plate armor made knights all but invincible to the weapons that used to be deadly just a generation earlier. Before plate, chainmail was the standard. It handled slashes well enough, but didn't help much against heavy hits or arrows with a sharp point. Plate changed all that overnight. Suddenly, even a strong sword blow just bounced off, and most arrows hit a wall and glanced away. Armorers weren't just piling on more metal, though. They were thinking about movement, balance, and the best ways to deflect a hit. Curved plates mattered. The chest, the shoulders, even the helmet, all were rounded and sloped, designed so that anything coming in would slide away instead of striking straight on. So what did this mean for knights in a real fight? For one thing, they could charge in. They could plant themselves right in the mess of battle, surrounded by chaos and swinging blades, and trust their plate to do its job. Think about it. The ability to take hits that would drop another soldier made knights not just safer, but actually more dangerous. You can play a lot more aggressively when you know your opponent's best move probably won't work. Even groups of lightly armored fighters would need to team up to bring down a heavily armored knight, and even then, it wouldn't be easy. Of course, the armor didn't make you Superman. There were always weak spots. Joints at the armpit, the back of the knee, the visor on your helmet. Skilled opponents learned to aim for these gaps. But getting a clean shot there required courage and luck in the middle of a fight. That's the thing about armor. You couldn't just swing wildly and hope for the best anymore. You needed precision, tricks, and sometimes a weapon built for the job. And that's where the real medieval arms race took off. The minute plate armor spread, armorers started a never-ending contest with weapon makers. Early swords didn't cut it, literally. So makers started beefing up the tips of their blades, making them strong enough to jab into a seam. When even that didn't work, out came the big guns, warhammers, maces, and poleaxes. These hit like a freight train. A warhammer could punch a dent into steel plate with a single blow, and a mace could knock the wind out of you, even if it didn't break through. Weapons like that didn't need to pierce, just to transfer enough force to rattle everything inside. The poleaxe, with its long handle and combination head, basically became the medieval version of a can opener. On top of that, archers upgraded their arrows. Bodkin points, think spikes rather than broadheads, were created to punch through plate at close range, or if the shot hit a weak angle. Every time armor improved, weapons got nastier. The result? The battlefield became a testing ground for innovation. If you want a visual, take a blunt stick or a hammer and hit it against a flat, thin piece of metal. The whole thing just shakes, and maybe you leave a dent. Now do it against something rounded, like a domed helmet or a breastplate with a curve. The blow glances off. The impact runs along the plate's surface instead of slamming straight in. That's by design. Imagine a slow-motion shot, just like what you see in a modern test. A clumsy swing, a flash of metal, and then the weapon slips sideways. Medieval craftsmen were thinking about angles and force long before anyone called it physics. The plates themselves spread out the blow, and if anything does get through, it's usually at a seam, not at the center of the armor. By turning knights into the medieval version of tanks, hard to stop, fast enough to charge, and frankly a pain to face down, plate armor turned every battle on its head. Ordinary fighters couldn't just hack away. Groups needed to rethink how they fought, too. New tactics popped up all across Europe. Formations changed, because the old shield wall just wasn't enough when ironclad knights came storming through looking for a weak spot. Some armies started using polearms with hooks to drag armored men off balance or off their horses. Others focused on outnumbering the knights, or using traps and muddy fields to wear them out. In response, knights themselves learned new tricks, grappling, wrestling holds, quick steps to avoid getting locked down, and even using the weight of their own armor to their advantage in a pileup. The arms race was real. As plate armor became widespread, battles got rougher. New weapons kept rolling out. The warhammer, for example, didn't just look mean. It was specifically designed to concentrate all its force on a small spot, like the edge of a helmet or the seam at an elbow. Knights hated the sight of them, but those hammers balanced the game. Long swords with strong points for thrusting became the new standard. The slashing, heroic sword fights you see on screen started, giving way to quick, brutal thrusts and clever joint locks. On top of that, soldiers started carrying daggers, not for regular fighting, but for finishing off an armored foe when he hit the ground. You'd stab between the plates, at the armpit or the visor if you got the chance. As fighting styles changed, so did the way battles were set up. Commanders used heavily armored knights as shock troops. Fast-moving units meant to charge, break lines, and scatter less protected enemies. Infantry had to band together for defense, using long pikes like hedgehog quills, hoping to keep the knights back. On both sides, formations spread out, and soldiers learned to move quickly to avoid getting caught in a charge. Plate armor changed how battles were fought, leading to new formations and tactics. That's not just theory. Written records describe armies experimenting with tactics all the time. Sometimes it worked, sometimes not, but no one went back to the old ways once plate was on the field. All this went beyond just staying alive. The fact that knights could take hits, move fast, and hit back just as hard made them the headline act in every big battle. When you see paintings of medieval fights packed with men in shining armor, what you're really looking at is the result of years of upgrades and tactical shifts. Knights fought like tanks, led like generals, and adapted like athletes. Commanders at the time didn't just trust in brute force. They trusted the armor to let their best fighters survive long enough to actually lead and win. The real magic of plate armor wasn't about looking tough. It was about winning wars and rewriting how war was even fought. Medieval armies that could field trained knights in full plate had an edge, pure and simple. Everyone else had to get creative or get crushed. Most battles came down to who adapted fastest, who could swing harder, move smarter, or make the armor count when it mattered most. It's no stretch to say that plate armor, more than any single weapon, reshaped the map of Europe and the way people fought for centuries. But every game changer has to retire someday. So, what finally ended the reign of plate armor? And did it really vanish overnight, like the movies want you to think? Armor didn't just disappear all at once like some magic trick. The truth is a lot messier, and way more interesting. For a long while, the best armorers in Europe weren't about to let go of their big invention. Every time something new and deadly appeared on the battlefield, smiths and metalworkers pushed back. You've seen how plate armor made knights faster, safer, and in many ways unstoppable. So, what finally knocked the wind out of their steel sails? You can pin most of it on the rise of firearms, but that's only the start. The first real threat wasn't even a gun. It was the slow crawl of technology. Early firearms like arquebus and muskets started to appear in the late 1400s and early 1500s. They weren't very accurate and took forever to reload, but when a heavy lead ball smacked into steel plate, something had to give. So what did armorers do? They doubled down. The answer for decades was to keep thickening the plate, add another layer over the breast, put more steel in the helmet, shrink the visor until it's barely more than a slit. Some late-period suits really look like someone took the tank idea a bit too far. The helmets got bigger and heavier. The breastplates sometimes had a little dent called a proof mark, basically a scar left to show the plate had already taken a gunshot and survived. But this race couldn't last forever. As guns got stronger and easier to use, all that extra steel started turning into a downside. Armorers battled back with clever designs, and for a while it worked. Soldiers turned up to wars dressed like walking fortresses, with tiny eye holes and huge metal gorgets to cover the neck. The fanciest armorers could make a full suit so tight and well-crafted you could almost swim in it. Still, the math just got worse. More metal meant more weight. A full cavalry suit could weigh over 80 pounds by the late 1500s. It got to the point where the best protection was staying out of the firing line altogether, because lugging around that much gear meant you'd tire yourself out before the real fight even started. Besides the pain in your back, there was another problem: cost. Real plate armor took massive skill and a small mountain of money to produce. A set could eat up an entire year's wages for a craftsman or minor landowner. Battles grew bigger, armies included more people, and fewer knights could afford to show up ready to go full steel mode. All this started to split the medieval world in half. Rich nobles might have the latest in bullet-stopping fashion. The rest made do with whatever cheaper kit they could find, or just stayed light fast, and easier to replace. Firearms kept getting deadlier, with muskets and pistols carving out bigger roles on the battlefield. Armorers kept tweaking their work. You see some weird in-between stages in museums, mixes of thick, high-necked breastplates and helmets that look like a cross between a mailbox and a diving bell. This so-called proof armor was tested, quite literally, by firing guns at it in the workshop before it left the forge. In some towns, you could even pay extra to get your set gun-proofed, with a nice ding on the chest as a receipt. Some pieces were so thick, you could barely lift them off the rack, with shoulder pieces nearly doubling as shields. Yet no armor could keep up forever. Muskets got stronger, and armorers hit a wall. Make the suit stronger, and it's too heavy to move in. Make it lighter, and bullets punch right through. Pretty soon, cavalry and infantry started dropping pieces. First the leg armor, then the gauntlets, until soldiers were wearing just breastplates and helmets, if anything at all. The battlefield was now full of shots echoing back and forth, and heavy knights just couldn't keep up with men carrying lighter muskets and pikes. There's another side to the story too. This wasn't just about guns winning. Warfare itself was changing. Massive armies of foot soldiers replaced small groups of elite knights. Tactics weren't built around the personal hero anymore. Now it was about teamwork, firepower, and sheer numbers. The high price of full plate meant only a select few could even try to keep up, and most armies needed everyone they could get, not just the wealthiest few. As the 1600s rolled on, full suits of armor quietly faded out. Knights, as we imagine them, noblemen in shining suits, leading from the front, were gone before the last swords left the field. Armor shifted to ceremonial use, fancy parades, and royal gifts, not for actual fighting. The knight in shining armor survived only in stories, paintings, and the occasional jousting tournament put on for show. The armored warrior, once at the very top of the food chain, now became a relic. But here's the real twist. Even as the old-school knight stepped into history books, the best ideas didn't disappear. The magic of plate armor, weight spread over the whole body, joints that slide and flex, hard shells that bounce away blows didn't go away. The basic science stuck around, only the materials and the looks changed. Modern protective gear borrows a ton from its medieval cousins, just with a new coat of paint. SWAT teams now gear up in body armor that moves with them. Soldiers wear vests layered with ceramic plates and high-tech fibers, shaped and distributed to protect without blocking movement. You can even see these tricks on the football field, where players cover delicate parts with hard, curved plastic plates, all attached to flexible backing that lets them sprint, pivot, and tackle. Take a closer look at a baseball catcher's gear or the equipment a hockey goalie wears. The plates overlap, flex at the elbow and knee, and ride snug around the torso, just like chain and plate armor did 500 years ago. The whole design boils down to three things: spread the weight, protect the joints, and use tough, shock-resistant shells to shrug off blows, then bounce right back. The only real difference is what it's made from. Carbon fiber instead of steel, layers of rubber instead of felt, lightweight mesh instead of quilted linen. This isn't just sports, either. Workers in construction, stunt performers in movies, even astronauts going out for a stroll in space rely on these old armor tricks. They need movement, protection, and enough comfort to get the job done. Exactly what knights demanded from their armor, only now with better options in the materials shop. It's all the same toolbox, just used in new ways. The mini payoff is clear. Plate armor, for all its heavy looks, was more than just metal. It was a set of clever solutions, ones that live on every time someone straps on body armor, buckles a helmet, or suits up to face impact and danger. The armored knight may be gone, but their science is still in play, keeping people safe when it matters. So next time you hear the old joke about slow, clumsy knights, you'll know those guys were ahead of their time. They were innovators in both war and wearable tech, leaving behind a legacy that never really left us at all. And now, you can see that story everywhere, from the sidelines of a football game to the front lines of modern policing. The biggest lie about medieval knights is that they lumbered around like slow-moving statues. In reality, they were the high-tech athletes of their time, trained, coordinated, and confident inside suits designed by experts who understood both protection and movement. Think less about old comedy sketches and more about a professional athlete gearing up before a big game. The reality of medieval plate armor shatters the myth of slow, clumsy knights, revealing them as highly skilled athletes of their era, a testament to the sophisticated engineering of the time. Next time you see a wobbling movie knight, ask yourself what the real history shows.